deep inside a narrow underwater radioactive cave in pitch black darkness. Navy Lieutenant Murray Anderson found himself in an unimaginable battle for survival 200 feet below the surface. What started as a thrilling adventure quickly became the first documented tragedy in cave diving history. On March 15, 1955, 28-year-old Lieutenant Murray Anderson and his friend Donald Garu entered the deep underwater cave inside Radium Springs in Albany, Georgia. With over 200 hours of underwater experience, Murray and his best friend planned to map unexplored sections of this beautiful yet dangerous cave. Radium Springs, the largest natural spring in Georgia, hid a massive honeycomb-structured cave system that stretched over 1,500 feet underwater. The cave was only accessible through a narrow passage at the bottom of the spring. As the leader of the Macon, Georgia Skin Diving Club and a Navy frogman, Murray and his fellow club member felt confident navigating this death trap. To get to the unmapped section of the cave system, they would have to swim through tight, twisting tunnels that forced divers to remove their air tanks to squeeze through. To complete the dive, Murray and Donald would have to carefully manage their air supply as they traversed the claustrophobic tunnels pressing down on them. In 1955, specialized diving equipment and safety regulations didn't exist yet. As a result, most divers had to create their own gear due to the high costs of quality equipment. This meant that divers like Anderson often ventured into caves with equipment cobbled together from discarded parts and items found at local hardware stores. However, despite their lack of training and equipment by today's standards, the pair remained determined to find the secrets of this irradiated cave. Little did they know, they were about to shape the safety guidelines that exist today. The underwater cave system pumps about 70,000 gallons of crystal clear water per minute, creating a deceptively beautiful environment. But this wasn't just any cave. Radium Springs got its name for a reason. The water's unique bluish glow was caused by the presence of radium, an element that is 1,000 times more radioactive than uranium. The water was once thought to have healing properties. However, prolonged exposure was later found to cause anemia, cataracts, cancer, and severe bone damage. But that didn't stop the two thrill-seekers from entering the cave. Outside of his work duties as a service member, Murray explored Georgia's many underwater caves with Donald. In the 1950s, people still considered cave diving as an extremist sport, and despite its perfect appeal for thrill-seekers, many declined to participate. Radium Springs had been on Murray's radar for months. Driven by the chance to make history, he and Donald made their final preparations. On that fateful day, Donald and Murray arrived at the dive site to prepare and put on their gear. However, they were unaware of the cave's honeycomb structure or how far the tunnels stretched underwater. It took them hours to put on their homemade diving rigs. By midday, the divers descended into the crystal clear waters toward the concealed 3-foot opening at the bottom of the springs with handmade flashlights. Once inside the spring's maze of tunnels, the pair planned to separate to make better use of their limited diving time. However, they had made a grave mistake. Feeling overconfident, Murray and Donald decided not to follow their basic diving safety training and refused to install a dive line at the cave's entrance. Installing a dive line at the beginning of the cave was common practice, especially in caves with heavy sediment content. They continued exploring, determined to find the unmapped sections. Because of the cave's tight spaces, the divers had to swim near the top of the cave with their fins at the sides to avoid agitating the thick layer of sediment, in an effort to maintain visibility. As they carefully floated through the cave, the experienced divers made several more fatal errors that led to the horrible catastrophe. The pair began laying the dive line only once they were inside. The divers continued, and things were going well for now. Murray and Donald maintained a steady but deliberate pace, nailing the line down in a way that didn't disturb the sediment. But the diving line was only 200 feet long, and once Donald laid the last of it down, he believed that their job was done. They had just made it to the supposedly unmapped sections of the cave. One thing was for sure, Donald had seen enough. He was ready to return to the surface. Indicating underwater as best he could, Donald signaled Murray that he was going back and he should come too. Instead of following his companion, Murray declined. deciding to accomplish what he had set out to do. He continued on swimming toward another restricted tunnel. Straying from the dive line, Murray ventured alone on a path he believed would help him to accomplish his goal. Instead of following him, Donald turned and swam back through the way they came and back to the surface. Here is where the divers made their second grave mistake. Donald and Murray never should have separated that day, but no one would realize that this was true until much later. Murray explored multiple passages, sweeping his homemade flashlight from side to side. The Navy diver scanned the cave's countless tunnels, hoping to find the one he needed. But as visibility began to grow worse, Murray became frustrated and careless. Instead of turning around, he pushed onward, swimming further into the confusing cave structure. He wasn't as familiar with Radium Springs as he should have been, and he became more reckless. Murray desperately tried to find the path that would lead him to the beautiful cave structures he had heard about. But in his haste to accomplish his goal, he had disturbed too much sediment on the cave floor. The once clear water was now filled with silt and debris that obstructed his vision. Realizing what he had done, Murray knew he had to admit that he was in over his head. Instead of risking further frustration or getting stuck, the Navy diver decided it was time to head back. Suddenly, Murray's homemade flashlight failed, plunging him into pitch-black darkness. Panic consumed him as he desperately reached out, struggling to find the guideline. With no sense of direction and nothing but his hands to navigate, he was at the cave's mercy. The sediment and unfamiliar cave structures interfered with his memory, making it impossible to tell which way led him to safety or further into the cave. Back on the surface, Donald paced anxiously, his eyes fixed on the entrance to the cave, waiting for his more experienced companion to return. Once an hour had passed, he knew that something was terribly wrong. Despite Murray's risk-taking antics, the Navy diver took safety seriously, and it wasn't like him to act so carelessly. As the seconds ticked away, Donald realized that Murray's air tank was about to run out. Knowing he couldn't wait any longer, Donald left to find help from fellow divers or any diving club member willing to lend a hand. It was dark when several members arrived on the scene. Jim Britton and 2 other divers paired up with Donald as he put on his gear to traverse the cave again and find Murray. With fresh equipment and flashlights, the diving groups quickly worked their way through the cave system, despite the cave's terrible visibility and lack of light. The rescue groups searched the cave using the dive line, even as conditions only allowed them to see a few inches in front of them. Searching for Murray with no visibility in the dark was risky enough, but the group searched diligently for hours. The rescue group searched at the end of the guideline, hoping to find any sign of Murray, but it was hopeless. Donald dared to search as many passages as he could, but all he could see was silt, rock, and debris. By this point, Donald's body was wearing down. His energy was spent, but he didn't want to leave his friend behind. Still, he knew that staying any longer in the cave would risk their safety, so they made the difficult decision to swim back toward the surface empty-handed. The incident attracted the attention of local resort residents staying at the hotel, but no one could help. However, once the Navy heard that Murray was missing, they flew in a team of senior divers from Charleston, South Carolina, to assist. By the time they arrived, it was Sunday morning, well over 20 hours since Murray never resurfaced from the cave. The Navy diving team wasted no time preparing for the dive. Within 30 minutes, they used the dive line and found the end, where Donald told them everything had gone wrong. Visibility had returned, and within seconds, the divers found Murray, floating near the top of the cave, just several feet from the dive line. The team then understood that Donald and the Macon Skin divers had likely swam under Murray for hours without knowing he was there. At 8 a.m. on the 15th, they pulled him from the cave, but the news soon became public knowledge. The incident sparked drastic changes in the diving community and sealed the fate of Radium Springs. It's truly a shame that it took such a tragedy for stricter diving rules to be put in place. Modern divers still use the rules established after the Radium Springs incident as their lifelines. Every diver is expected to always use a dive line, have multiple flashlights, and rely on the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is fundamental, as it means that divers take enough gas for the descent, return, and emergencies. Murray Anderson's incident marked the first recorded fatality of a diver in a water-filled cave in the United States. Had stricter diving regulations existed at the time, this tragedy might have been prevented. However, diving mistakes have shaped the sport into what it is today. One thing is certain: overconfidence can be just as dangerous as cave diving itself.